Hello, friends and neighbors, and welcome to the poem of the day for today, Monday, October the 13th, 2025. It just occurred to me, I think it was last year or 2 years, it would have been 2 years ago, I suppose. October the 13th landed on a Friday, um, which really demands watching Friday the 13th that day, which I believe I did. And was a bit underwhelmed, to be honest, but it needed to happen nonetheless. But today's Monday the 13th, and instead of watching Friday the 13th, we will continue reading through the poems of Edgar Allan Poe. Today's poem is The Valley of Unrest, which comes from 1831 and then was rewritten and revised and republished in 1845. I think what you'll hear in this poem is some of the stylistic and formal elements are consistent with previous poems of his that we've read in this series, but that the tone and the images that are evoked, while strong, are kind of slightly different in mood this time around. But we'll see if you agree with the things that I'm picking up. So this is The Valley of Unrest by Edgar Allan Poe. Once it smiled a silent dell where the people did not dwell. They had gone unto wars, trusting to the mild-eyed stars, nightly from their azure towers to keep watch above the flowers, in the midst of which, all day, the red sunlight lazily lay. Now, each visitor shall confess the sad valley's restlessness. Nothing there is motionless. Nothing, save the airs that brood over the magic solitude. Ah! By no wind are stirred those trees that palpitate like the chill seas around the misty Hebrides. Ah, by no wind those clouds are driven that rustle through the unquiet heaven uneasily, from morn till even, over the violets there that lie in myriad types of the human eye, over the lilies there that wave and weep above a nameless grave. They wave. From out their fragrant tops eternal dews come down in drops. They weep. From off their delicate stems perennial tears descend in gems. So if you agree with my hypothesis that this is similar in structure, then you would notice the single stanza that has some movement within it, but more changes throughout, kind of a gradual development than a sharp volta. That said, there is a pretty sharp change in here. I'm not really sure why he doesn't break these into stanzas, but we begin with once in italics and then now in italics. You likely noticed a very similar meter to previous Poe poems that we read, and you likely noticed the rhyming couplets along with some slant rhyme, or what some other people might refer to as just cheating rhyme, where it's really close, but not quite. We'll tie goes to the runner. And people often refer to that characteristic of Poe's poetry as being a kind of a flaw of it. And perhaps that's the case, because as I mentioned previously, he was not really regarded as that strong of a poet, but the more of his poems I read, I'm tempted to view them more as a feature than a flaw. And that's not to say that they were necessarily intentional, but they do create this kind of uncanny incongruity in them that makes me feel that things are slightly off. And a lot of that is also present within the content of what he's writing about, that something wicked this way comes, that there's something that about the ordinary world that you normally see that is going to reveal itself to those who are slightly melancholy, or those who are looking in the right places, or those who have more active imaginations, perhaps people that are already grieving. Nonetheless, I think the question of the rhyme scheme is an interesting one, if not one that necessarily demands all of our attention. But the main turn, or the main division within this poem, remains between the once and the now. And the Valley of Unrest Um, just even looking at that title, um, valleys are vast fields where things grow. They can be rather still, but also because of the kind of extreme size of them, often if you drive by a valley, the tall grass or um, whatever it is growing in there is going to dance and is going to wave. The wind is going to have a pretty strong visible effect, and yet we have almost it's not really a oxymoron, but an image at the beginning that is kind of a contrasting one, one of like a cool stillness to it. And I think that that's what characterizes this poem, is that as opposed to previous Poe poems that we've read, there were things in there that were more frightening and mysterious and terrifying, horrifying, somewhat threatening or sinister. This one is much more somber and melancholic than it is actually scary by any stretch. And places in which I'm seeing that is within that difference between the once and the now, especially when we look into the now. So the place that's being described in this valley is a graveyard. It's a place where many people are buried, probably men, many of whom have died after some sort of large event. It's not specified in here, but I feel as though this is like a graveyard from the Revolutionary War or something like that. And it does mention here they had gone unto the wars, trusting the mild-eyed stars. So that's a place where perhaps we could glean that, but it not being specifically set within the United States, I think this poem is translatable outside of time and outside of location. But after this turn with now, the valley is described as being sad and restless. Nothing there is motionless, nothing save the airs that brood over the magic solitude. So there is a rest at the beginning of the poem once, but there's something now about it described as a magic solitude. And remember from previous poems, Poe is very careful and very insistent upon that distinction between loneliness and solitude. He says there's two ahs in here, those brief interjections that suggest more of a contemplation or more of a realization of a particular idea. And the first ah we get is about halfway down the stanza. By no wind are stirred in those trees that palpitate like the chill seas. And then later, ah, by no wind, those clouds are driven that rustle through the unquiet heaven. So we have anaphora with those, ah, by no wind. And in the second one, we have clouds moving again, but clouds that are not moved by the wind, which is how clouds are moved. And this is a very, very similar image that we got from, let's see if I can pull it off the top of my head here. Was it Spirits of the Dead that we did previously? I think it was, but I also might be wrong. Let's see. I think it was Spirits of the Dead, which this poem, I think, even within title and within content and subject, can be read alongside. So we have the movement of the clouds despite there being no wind to push them, and an uneasiness in the morning that strikes the human eye over these lilies. And these lilies are the only things that are there to mourn the people. The people come and visitors come to the grave, but it's the lilies that are there described as weeping above the nameless graves as they wave, from presumably this non-wind that's there. So there's a sense also in which the valley has kind of an animus or an animating spirit to it. And as they're waving, the wave and the weep on those alternating lines are combined together. They're meant to be read together. And they're also described as fragrant and delicate. So as the dew is coming down off of the lilies, the poet is seeing them as perennial tears. So that these lilies that are there, and lilies are often associated with grief, death, sorrow. That when the morning comes after this very still night, there's the dew that sits on there, and then the dew is the thing that cries. So even within this valley of unrest and the solitude that's there, it's a solitude that's marked by a lack of humans that are there to mourn them, but that nature has kind of taken the dead in for itself and can feel the intensity of that loss. I think one of the things this poem asks is what happens to a place, a location, a aspect of nature, if nature is animate, when it has to consume or absorb large amounts of violence and human loss? And is there a sense in which this pervading mood of grief and melancholy, a real somber and kind of contemplative attitude, if it exists separate of the humans that are there to visit and are there to mourn, is there something about a place that itself can be sad? Not just what the place evokes out of the human, but the way in which the place becomes upset, restless, the place of unrest there. And that then brings us back, of course, to the title, where a graveyard is supposed to be the place of your eternal rest. And then that too is being subverted and being overturned here. So you can see the way in which this poem is far less scary or spooky than the previous ones, but is also one that is itself kind of anxious and restless about what happens after death, but what happens after large kind of human violence, catastrophe, or cataclysm, and in what way does nature respond to that? What effect does it have beyond just the humans who are there? Thank you for joining us again. Came to you a little bit later tonight, and we will continue tomorrow. Hopefully it'll be a little bit earlier tomorrow, but I kind of doubt it. So anyway, I hope everyone is well, and until then, I wish you all peace.